Welcome. It's Sunday, February 19th. We have a mixed bag today of things in our readings, and as such, what I thought I'd do is try to summarize for you a number of things, and then at the end I'll focus in on one thing that I really wanted to spend some time on. Even though there's a lot of detail and we go back and forth, there's a lot in here, and I look forward to having a chance to hear your thoughts and comments about it as well. First of all, as we summarize and look through these, we look at Leviticus chapter 9 through 11 and really maybe start with Leviticus chapter 1 and see where we've come through all of this. In the first 7 chapters we have, of course, that detailed explanation of all the 5 different types of offerings, the 4 that involved animals and the 1 that involved grain. We now then moved in chapter 8 and then here now today in chapters 9 and 10 back to a narrative, back to the kind of the story where something actually happens. And we have here in chapters 9 and 10 the ordination ceremonies for Aaron and the priests. First of all, in chapter 8, it had been a long week. Of course, this thing went on for an entire week. There was an entire process. We had the beautiful garments that they wore, getting the tabernacle ready to go, purifying it, and as such. And so that was in chapter 8. We have this huge build-up. You know, we've kind of gone through this whole process of all the preparations for the construction, all the direction that was needed, all of the materials that had to be gathered, who was going to do what, and then the process of building it. And finally now with Aaron and his sons as designated priests being consecrated, anointed, set apart, and ordained as such. So we get through all of this, and we've had this big build-up, and now we come to chapter 9, and of course in chapter 9 is like day 1. This is where it all begins, where Aaron and the priests go in and begin to perform their first priestly acts, and it's very exciting. And what's interesting, I think, is in chapter 9 it culminates with really what I think is the high point, and that is the coming of the glory of the Lord. Now, the Hebrew word here for glory is kabod. And if we look at all the places in the Old Testament, as we look through Exodus and some other places, Ezekiel and the Psalms, we get a better and fuller meaning of what this word really means when we talk about the glory of the Lord. And what's interesting is that when we see this word and when we find the Israelites experiencing the glory of the Lord, usually there's some sort of physical manifestation that goes right along with it. But what I think we have to remember here is that the manifestation, the outward physical act of whatever's happening is not the glory. Rather, as we look through all these references, the glory of the Lord is actually in His presence. It's about His presence with the people. So this sheds a new light on what that word actually means, and that's what I want to focus on at the end, and I'll take a couple minutes to talk about that. So that's chapter 9. We move on into chapter 10, and how unfortunate. We go from the highest high really to the lowest low right off the bat, because a couple of Aaron's sons are found to have carelessly been following their priestly responsibilities, and they are struck down by God. Now, commentators go back and forth trying to guess exactly what it is they were doing wrong with the incense. Clearly there was something, but they can only guess at what that might have been. Wrong incense, impure incense, wrong place to burn incense, whatever it may be. But there was clearly something amiss, and what we also find out in the references is it seems they had been drinking, and I think probably the best phrase then we could use here is the one we hear all the time now: don't drink and drive. You know, because we're really not in this reference saying that alcohol is bad. What we are saying, or what the text is saying, is it's making it clear that at work, especially work in the temple, not a good place for drinking. And I think in our own lives we want to remember that there are times where it might be appropriate, but there are many times where it is not, and people need to use care with regards to that. And if for some it means you just don't drink at all, that's fine too. However, here clearly there was a problem and an issue. So we start off the very first day with the work of these priests, Aaron and his 4 sons, and all of a sudden we're down to 3. And so chapter 10 takes us in a whole different direction. And then we move it back out of a narrative kind of reading into chapter 11, which really goes from chapters 11 through 15 back into a section of describing and dealing with, in this case, what is clean and unclean and how you deal with it. So as we look at that section then and pay particular attention here to chapter 11, probably the overarching theme is really all about the holiness of God and of life, and I think that's probably the best way to summarize it, because there's a lot of stuff in there, and we could talk about the various animals. Nobody really knows for sure exactly what is being spoken about there. They just kind of, different translations use different names for the various animals, and so we don't know exactly. Different writers and theologians down through the years have tried to come up with some overarching way to explain it, and probably really are only partially effective. But the idea of things being holiness, things being set apart, God is holy, and his people then also likewise being holy, I think is probably key. So ultimately a question we might ask ourselves in this section is, have we lost that sense of holiness, of being set apart, of being in the world but not of the world, so to speak? Maybe Heather or I can address that in a future post. But for now, I want to move on. As I told you earlier, I want to focus in a little bit in chapter 9 with that thread concerning the glory of God. I just think it's very interesting and valuable for us. And as I said earlier, reading through the commentators, they spoke of the fact that it was not the manifestations themselves that were the glory, it was God's presence. And I think over and over we see so often down through history, not only in scriptures but in real life, it's kind of akin to the fact that so often we as God's people, the created, we tend to worship the created rather than the creator. And I think this in some cases gets to be that way, where we look at the manifestation, the outward miraculous, exciting, wild experience, and we pay all our attention to that and miss the fact that really it signifies God's presence among his people. Now, having said that, I will tell you, I don't know if you're like this, but there are times where I'm just a bit envious of people of old who experienced God's presence in marvelous, miraculous, wonderful, and exciting ways, and those kind of real, tangible experiences. You know, there are times where a cloud or a pillar of fire might not be so bad. To be sure, we have those visible elements. God gives them to us in the sacraments. In baptism we have water, and in the Lord's Supper we have the bread and wine. However, they're very ordinary. They are not in the sense of themselves miraculous, though certainly the connection with God's Word makes them do miraculous things in our lives. But I think it goes back to human nature. We just want something that we can grab a hold of, something we can see or touch or feel, and that may be why some within Christendom focus in on a lot of those charismatic experiences, because they want to see those outward manifestations and experience that. And I think that is natural for us. We kind of believe, I think, on one hand, that by having that kind of an experience, that will strengthen our faith and our resolve to trust in God. Sadly, if you look through the scriptures, a miracle or some sort of wild experience did not guarantee a strong faith, did not guarantee a trust in God. And maybe just to list a few of them, we could think of the Red Sea, the quail and manna, the winning of a sacrificial contest on Mount Carmel, or even raising people from the dead, such as Lazarus. Not everybody who witnessed those was a trusting follower of God, or found their faith strengthened because of it. But we desire them nonetheless. And in reality, there's nothing wrong with those thoughts or those desires. They're really a part of human nature, as I said. But we can experience God's presence in a different way today, in our prayer life and in our faith life. And I think that's maybe something that we can really focus on. I would say happy is the person who can be like King David, who in the wilderness in Psalm 63, verses 1 and 2, cries out, "O God, you are my God. Earnestly I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in a dry and weary land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory." In the midst of the wilderness, David cries out and says, "I know you are here. I have seen you before, even though everything around me says you're not." And then in verses 6 through 8, he remembers God and trusts in him even when there is no outward manifestation. He says, "On my bed, I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night, because you are my help. I sing in the shadow of your wings. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me." So even when I don't see you, I don't feel you, I know you are there. I trust in you. Today, I pray that I might faithfully trust in God's presence in my life, knowing he's with me, whether I can see him, whether I can feel him, or whether I don't see or feel anything at all, but to know that he is there. I'm praying that that may be a comfort to me, and I pray it's a comfort for you as well. Have a great day in the Lord.